Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Christina Hartley. I'm the executive director here at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. On behalf of the Friends of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, we respectfully acknowledge that the ground on which we stand are traditional Miami and Shawnee lands. We extend our esteem and gratitude to the indigenous people who call this place home. I would like to welcome you to the final iteration of the Voices for Truth 2024 discussion series. And we have a spectacular evening set out for tonight. Just a couple of informational pieces, because we do have a few newcomers here. And so what we will do is first, well, let me get through my announcements. One, I messed that up. Says our speaker for Voices for Truth discussion series, school out. So I do want to give a plug to school out sponsors for tonight. We also, the format of what the discussion series will be, Dr. Getz and Dr. Mitch.
Nyawalo.
Say your last name again?
Nyawalo.
Nyawalo. Thank you. They will be our discussion leaders tonight. We'll start with a timeline that kind of outlines how all of these readings are connected and authors of the readings are connected. And then we will open it up for the discussion questions. And you should have gotten a copy of the timeline and discussion questions. We sent those out this morning, and then also we have some hard copies here, so you'll be able to follow along with those. So let me, the actual format is, we'll do the timelines and the discussion questions. We usually go till about 8:15-ish, give or take a little bit, but that's what our time is moving for. And we will go ahead and get started. One other thing for the people in the room, if you are speaking, you need to face not the screen, but the owl, so that they can see you as you're speaking and hear you clearly. I put the discussion leaders between the owl and the screen, so that when they look at the screen, they're like, how is looking at the owl? So, I am only slightly clever. That is one of the things that I figured out pretty early. If you are online, you can either just unmute yourself and interject if you have a question or a comment, or if you feel like you need to be a little bit more focused, or you can't get a word in edgewise, do a virtual hand raise, and I will call on you because I will monitor that. And if you can't use your microphone, just type your comment or question into the chat, and I will periodically call those out as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the meat and vegetables. Yeah. And I will do that by sharing the timeline for everyone.
It's such a short timeline.
Well, we will try to not relive every moment of it. Okay, thanks, Chris. It's always instructive to me to do these timelines, because when I start putting these authors side by side, interesting things emerge. All three of these authors, Harriet Beecher Stowe always sneaks in, even if we're talking about Solomon Northup and Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Beecher Stowe gets right in the middle there. But the three of them were born roughly at the same time, within 5 years of each other. And yet it's a good example of white privilege that Harriet sails along with her life quite nicely, while Solomon Northup, indeed being born a free person in New York State, you might think he'd do just fine, but he doesn't. Of course, he's kidnapped later on and enslaved. And of course, Harriet Jacobs was born into slavery in North Carolina. So you can see three lives very different from just from the way they start out. Harriet's Cincinnati connection starts in 1832 when she moves with her father's family to Walnut Hills, where he becomes president of Lane Theological Seminary. And Harriet moves with him. She's 21 at the time, so she doesn't have to, but she wants to join her sister in founding a educational institution for women downtown, and she's a teacher there too. Um, Again, you see some interesting juxtapositions in 1835, 41, and 42. 1835, Jacobs escapes and begins hiding in the tiny crawl space under the roof of her grandmother's house for 7 years. And it is from that perspective, that's where she is at the time of the Christmas story that the Christmas chapter that you read about. So that's why she can't interact directly with her kids at that point. And it is, and then in 1841, Northrup is kidnapped, and it is 1840 or thereabouts that we have restored part of this house to reflect the Beecher era here. So interesting convergences always emerge. Jacobs does escape in the early 40s to New York City and works as a domestic for a while. So big moment for Harriet Beecher Stowe, 1851-52, writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, huge success. Published in finished serialization in 51, published in 52, and in 1853, in an attempt to partly to capitalize on that success, Northrup is publishing he's been rescued from slavery and publishes his, in 53, his narrative, his freedom narrative. But a key thing to notice about Northrup in 1853, he is rescued from slavery in Louisiana, and within 3 months, with a ghostwriter, a white ghostwriter, David Wilson, he publishes 12 Years a Slave, and he will dedicate the second edition to Harriet Beecher Stowe. There is another connection between the two in her Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which she wrote in 1853 to counter the arguments that she had been too tough on slavery in Uncle Tom's Cabin. She provides all this documentation, and some of it is Northrup's own account that was published in the New York Times before the book publication came out, of his book, 12 Years a Slave. So, but the book was put together in 3 months, Northrup's book was, and you need to think about the role of the white ghostwriter in this book, and we might want to talk about that at some point. That is not the case with Harriet Jacobs. Lydia Mariah Child, the abolitionist, helped her with the book, but she was pretty explicit about not making any significant changes in it. And she said the ideas and the language are basically Harriet Jacobs' own. Okay, and it was Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl was published in 1861, just a few months before the Civil War broke out. Interesting thing about about Northup's book and about Jacobs' book, and this will take us toward the end of this first timeline. 1968, out of print soon after the Civil War, 12 Years of Slavery gains attention after scholar Sue Lyles Aiken publishes the first authenticated edition. A PBS film follows in 1984, and then the feature film that many of you will have seen in 2013. 1968, it took that long for the book to gain attention. You know, it did get some attention right before the Civil War, but then after that, it kind of fell out of favor, or, you know, it was just seen as not that important. And similar fate for Harriet Jacobs. The top of the next page, 1987. Now we're 20 years fast forwarding for that. Although Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl drew some favorable response, when it was written, it was largely neglected after that until 1987, when Jean Fagan Yellen's scholarly edition showed that it was indeed not a novel, as a lot of people thought, because it was published under the pseudonym Linda Brent. People thought it was a novel. It was not. She documented that it was true. The events really happened. And suddenly it became, as freedom narratives came to be studied more and more. And I saw this during my career as a professor. We didn't read any of these books when I was in grad school. We didn't read Frederick Douglass's narrative. We didn't read certainly Harriet Jacobs. We didn't read 12 Years a Slave, any of these books. That wasn't even a genre that we were aware of when I was doing my PhD exams in 19th century American literature. All of this came later. Thank God it did, but it took a long time for these books to be rediscovered. Okay, Primo Levi, and I'll try to get through this one quickly. He was, there's a point about anti-Semitism in Italy. It's a little different. There was always anti-Semitism in Italy, but it didn't really take hold until Mussolini's alliance with Hitler became much stronger. And then, partly because of that, there was a crackdown against Jews in Italy, more so. And that's when 1938, the Italian racial laws really cracked down on Italian Jews. He's caught he's in a resistance group in 1943, not a very effective resistance group, and he winds up in Auschwitz in a laboratory, and that's where the events that you read about take place. In 1945, he survives the war by accident. Well, partly through help from friends sharing rations with him, as he mentions, this Lorenzo Rome did that for him. Also his alliance with Alberto, another friend, sharing food with him. And Levi was a very small, thin guy to begin with. And he would not have survived on his own without these friends helping him. And he was a PhD chemist. He was not he was not a bricklayer like Lorenzo Perone. And he survives by the good luck of getting scarlet fever in 1945. So he was not death marched along with the more able prisoners as the Nazis in 45 fled the Russian army, liberating the camp in late January. He was one of 23 of 650 Italian Jews to survive that camp. 23 out of 650. And it was because he was there. Originally, the Nazis had planned to kill all of the people in sickbay, but they were in such a hurry to leave that they didn't bother to do that. So again, luck was part of the way that he survived. So he eventually writes his memoir called "If This Is a Man." It's in the American version is Survival in Auschwitz. He writes a couple of volumes of that. 1948, mental and physical health of his friend Lorenzo Perone declines. Unfortunately, the guy dies. I'll read you a little bit about that. This is he said, Perone helped people out of pure altruism. They said that was such a shock in the camp. And afterwards, he was haunted by his memories. He drank. He told me something. He said, he then told me something about something which in Auschwitz I hadn't suspected. Down there, he helped not only me, he had helped other people, proteges, Italian and not. But he had thought it not right not to tell me about it. We were in this world to do good, not to boast about it. In Auschwitz, he had been a rich man, at least compared to us, and had been able to help us. But now it was over. He had no more opportunities. And so he dies alone. He who was not a survivor had died of the survivor's disease. That's what Levi says of him finally. So this memoir was published in 1978, Moments of Reprieve, which includes the selection you read. He says each chapter focuses on a person who stood out against that tragic background, friends, people I'd traveled with, even adversaries, begging me one after another to help them survive and enjoy the ambiguous perennial existence of literary characters, the ones in whom, if only for a moment, I had recognized the will and capacity to react, and hence a rudiment of virtue. The protagonists of these stories are men, he means men in quotes, humans, we would say, beyond all doubt, even if the virtue that allows them to survive is not always approved by common morality. These are marginal moments of reprieve. He also made a very controversial statement in 1982 when he was interviewed. This was right after Israel had occupied southern Lebanon, and the Israeli forces there had permitted, even enabled the massacre of Palestinians and Shia Muslims. And he said, everybody is somebody's Jew, and today Palestinians are the Jews of the Israelis. This did not leave him, get him a lot of favor in Israel, but he was vindicated the following year when an Israeli court found Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, indirectly responsible for the massacres at Shabra and Shalita, and forced him to resign his vote. So he was outspoken about the horrors of the Holocaust and not afraid to speak out when he thought Israel was out of line too. His death in 1987 is controversial. It was ruled a suicide, but many of his friends argue that it was an accident. He fell from a balcony, third floor balcony in his apartment building. And a lot of people said, well, he had just called me 10 minutes before, he had projects ongoing, things like that. He wouldn't have killed himself in that scenario. So we don't know. So let me hand it over to Mitch to read the first question.
First question here. I was intrigued, right, by today's topic, Christmas, hope in terrible times, which was very topical, I would say. I can all relate to this. Oh, yeah, the first question is, what do you see as the main source of hope in the selection from the freedom narratives by Northrup and Jacobs? I know it's okay if we also want to contest whether these are truly hopeful moments. Do you think that hope is created more from external forces, from within the characters themselves?
Internal.
Mhm.
Yeah, they come from within.
Why
Wow.
or how?
You know, we're gonna talk about a lot of things, you know. The holidays, but for some people, they have a sentimental feeling about the holidays.
Mm.
And what it means to them, and it's personal and intimate. So yeah, that's why I think it comes to inside.
So we kind of like think of hope in the sense of these fleeting moments, right?
Yeah.
Of joy amidst horror. Right? Yeah.
It's like a light, and the candle one burns out, or if it's blown out. You know, the holidays are back to work. They're 363 days a year of work, right? Yeah, so they only get like 2 or 3 days off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So some good things, right? That he yeah.
Yeah, I agree in terms of it has to come from internally because, you know, the circumstances around them are so horrible that you could easily just wallow in all of that horribleness. But they had the, you know, kind of the right adjective, the idealism to, you know, say, I'm gonna take a shred of something. I'm seeing my children. I'm seeing them. They don't know that I'm here. They don't know that I'm seeing them, but I see them and I see them. Not that they got this new close. And so I'm gonna take that and go with that. And Solomon also in that same kind of vein, he's like, people could celebrate for a couple of days, that they could relax, they do their thing for a couple of days. The rest of the year is terrible, but we're gonna be able to take that, kind of take that respite that we need. And so, looking on the right side of things, looking at the one shred of good that's happening is the hope that comes from within it. Yeah.
And taking that hope that they had for those few days once a year. And I can imagine, I don't know that anybody said that in either one of these, but taking that and remembering that throughout the year, that, I did have that good time, and I can look forward to 3 more days a year from now or 6 months from now when I'll get that opportunity again.
I'm gonna call on Amy. She always has something.
Yes, please. So I was looking at the Northrup and it's on page 217, which is like my 6th page of page 96 of the PDF, but it's at page 217. He talks about the importance of music, not just the opportunity that playing music gave him, but also the joy and peace that playing music gave him. So in my mind, I often equate like music with other arts, but I think, we hear a lot about spirituals and songs, and I think those help people endure through a lot of the difficult times, and he mentions it specifically. But I don't know if it shows up in the other texts, but it definitely shows up here.
Is playing music, systems of oppression, right? Whether it's slavery or whether it's colonialism, often functions through certain forms of hierarchies, right? Where certain individuals with certain talents who may be exempt from some of the most gruesome aspects, right? Of that oppression, right? And he finds himself in that situation, right? Where because he can play the violin really well, he's able to have a comparatively easier or more tolerable, so intolerable, right? Degrees of horror, right? So slightly different, right? Situation than others who don't have that talent. And when people think like, what do we think of that reality, right? Of the fact that yes, he can do that, right? Because he can play the violin. And how we think systematically about, right, what his talent allows him to do versus what other people are not able to do who don't have that particular talent. And what kind of reality does that hierarchy create, right?
Because that's a little bit more money. The hard part word is access to like more events and more people. And so the network, I said, because of this music, he's networking, he's able to go to other people's houses and make more money. So
And make more connections with not just other enslaved people, but other enslavers also. So he's got connections throughout the community that enslaved who don't have those extra talents don't get that opportunity.
But kind of in a different vein from that, even those who didn't have a violin or didn't have that talent to play the violin, there's still the padding when they're talking about the dancing and how you used to get your padding yourself. So I guess that kind of goes back to the hope, those days of restricted liberty, as they said in the section, that they get to sing, they get to dance. They've written these songs or put them together the month leading up to it. And even even when the fiddlers can't play anymore, when they're too tired, the patterns are still going until the dawn. So you don't even, obviously it gave him more access. He was able to travel around and to perform to other families. But for those who couldn't, they still have that hope inside of them. They had that ability to move and be free to just kind of feel natural in this company during those few days.
I was there was this section on page 154 for me. It says, white people in great numbers assembled to witness the gastronomical enjoyments. What do we make of the white gaze, right? That's present, right, in these things, yeah.
I thought that was interesting. Do you think it was because the whites, quote unquote, were amazed that there was all this food there that was being shared with the enslaved? Or was it because of the volume? I wasn't sure what they were amazed by.
I'm almost anticipating the next question, yeah.
Dan wanted to interject too, sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
I sort of going to be a disagreement with most of it, but I think I heard that people thought this was internal. And I think it's almost all external. Almost everything that the people are waiting for is relationships with others. And they see those relationships as being joyful. So I think that although they start from an internal, that they're external in that they are all relationships with others. The concentration camp relationships, even the playing music, Amy, the playing of music with others, are relationships and sharings. And it's sort of that Christmas has given them a time. This area of Christmas has given them a time to be sharing their small amount of joy that they are able to have themselves with others. So I saw it that way.
So there's a comment about that in the chat. Sadie had mentioned that music is very important to get you going to continue through the day. And if we're comparing times in Auschwitz, the Nazis had forced some of the prisoners to play music for others who were working. And so in that context, it's kind of a twisted irony.
I think in a way, Dan and everybody else are saying the same thing, but from different angles. Because the music comes from the community, the African American community, not from the white community. So it's coming from within the people collectively, the people as a group, not from the white people doing anything for them, but so it's both internal and external. I think it's a communal activity. I think community is really important, despite the efforts of the white slaveholders to try to break up community as much as they can often.
Community gives you strength. Community gives you strength.
Yes.
Yeah. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was the especially in 12 Years a Slave, where he's talking about the, getting married and the wooing going on, the flirting going on, that he associated with the celebration of Christmas. Just seemed interesting to me that, that flirting, had been going on the rest of the year too, but he saw it important enough to talk about specifically around Christmas.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's one, if I would be allowed to read like one section from that, that's on page 159, where he says, such is the Southern life as it is. 3 days in the year, as I found it, the other 362 days being of awareness and fear. So he says that marriage is frequently contracted during the holidays. It's such an institution. May be said to exist among them. The only ceremony required before entering into that holy estate is to obtain the consent of the respective owners. It is usually encouraged by the masters of female slaves. Either party can have as many husbands or wives as the owner will permit. However, either is at liberty to discard the other at pleasure. Like, how do we, right? Like, on the one hand, we want to say, oh yeah, that's so nice, right? They get to flirt with one another. But what's really the purpose of this?
To learn children.
Yes,
Yes.
children as property, yes. Yeah. If I could continue, right? It's to me, it's both. So there are fleeting moments of right of respite, if you will, right? Joy that they have, right? That's an escape from the daily gruesome realities. But this space, right? As much as it allows them to enjoy and commune with one another, it's hence the white gaze, right? Allowing this is also serves the purpose of in some way maintaining the institutional sense, saying, you cannot, right? They need to so they can work again, right?
Yeah.
This is a way of ensuring, right? That so they continue being productive, they children, right? Who become property, right? And so we have to examine, right, that dichotomy, right, between the function of that moment which serves the institution and maybe the other subversive aspects that may emerge from that. How do we reconcile? I may be going to the next question. How do we reconcile particular tension?
It's interesting to think that in that situation, the whites, the enslavers, thought that giving the enslaved 3 days off a year was enough to enable them to work the other 362.
Yeah.
Like if you're out of stringing.
Mhm.
And then and just keep going, like the illusion that they're gonna have.
Yeah. Let me just get to Christmas and then next year, let me just,
It's just,
Yeah.
yes. So it's a cycle, right? In some ways, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you consider rereading that quote, the one that was the astronomical, that, I can't remember the exact phrasing.
Yes, white people in great numbers assembled to witness the gastronomical enjoyments. Yeah.
And there's a major difference between something like being an experience for someone and then it being a spectacle for someone else. And that's how I read into with that sentence. It's an experience, a shared experience, internal and external for a lot of the enslaved folks, and then spectacle for enslavers. And I think it could be, of course, it's interesting, like where that was placed, because you're talking about the food and the dancing and the liveliness. But then there's this kind of insidiousness that's like hanging over top of all of that, with that white gaze. Well, just in terms of writing, I mean, it brilliantly is that.
Yeah.
I want to point out in the chat, Sadie also mentioned, going back to the music component, she's read accounts of prisoners in concentration camps who sang their country's national anthems in the harder times, or even in the times before death, key times happening when during those death marches or being led to the gas chambers. And this is what we've been talking about, and how music is a communal hope of sorts. So, but that's also within that.
So we think of hope, right? when the very moment that you're enjoying is part of a way to get you to, right, to stay within that oppressive system. How do we also navigate actually? How do we subvert that moment? Right?
Sometimes when you're in a fishbowl, you don't realize you're in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain where this goes from because they have failure rates that being victims and, you know, I can't imagine. So I don't know, it's really hard. You can't imagine it. Yeah, where the victim from? That's a great question. I think a lot of people, when people are in dire times, they think, you know, hope for a better end, or a chance to see their children grow up, or, yeah, I don't know. It makes me really think, yeah.
Or to just find one small thing that you can hang on to as something positive in your life when everything else is so bad. That and I agree, I don't know how I would react to that. I don't know how these folks were able to have the hope that they did to, you know, for so many of them who tried to escape. You know, I'm not sure that I'd have the inner strength to do that. To say, there's something better out there, I'm gonna go find it, no matter what it does with me. You know, to me. That's tough.
So, sorry, I. It's not open yet. It's open now inside. Back to the.
You know, we're jumping around and around. It's changing all Nicholas is going to say a little bit about what we doing.
To Frederick Douglass's question, question two, Frederick Douglass in his narrative, which was written before Northup and Jacobs wrote their book, he took a very dim view of the Christmas holidays for enslaved people. These holidays, he said, serve as conductors or safety valves to carry off the rebellious spirit of enslaved humanity. The holidays are part and parcel of the gross fraud, wrong, and inhumanity of slavery. So why do you think Northup and Jacobs find some hope, however limited, in pleasure where Douglass does not? And do you think the different perspectives are compatible? Maybe that's what we're kind of struggling with right now. Can they be reconciled at all?
With apologies for saying behind you. I thought this one, at least my take on it, was that, you know, a lot of different types of people have the doers, you have the followers, you have the idealists, the ideators. You know, I would say, you know, it's the folks that are trying to find hope, are trying to survive, hoping things will change. And Frederick Douglass had, at this point, freed himself. And now he was trying to elicit change. He was trying to actively get people to rise up and change. And that's a distinction. It's like there's a distinction between hoping you'll live to see a better day and then actually, no, it's so bad I gotta do something about it. That was the difference that I saw.
When you're on the outside of something, you can look into it and be like, be enraged and be angry, and you have that space to be like, this is wrong. And there's so many of you, you have so much power, you can stand up, you can revolt, you can lead. But they were born into that oppression. They only know, I can live till tomorrow, I can live till tomorrow, I didn't get beat today, I didn't get raped today, I didn't get sold today, my kids are still with me, And so they aren't compatible, they are in direct opposition to each other, but exactly, it's based on who's experiencing it. Am I gonna survive till tomorrow? Or you're outside of it, you already survived, and you're like, do something, rise up, move, but they're so scared, it's just like, no.
And of course, Frederick Douglass also saw that freedom was not ideal if your skin was black. That it didn't matter. It didn't matter that he was free in many ways, because he was still oppressed. Yes.
For Douglas, also the context of Douglas's remark, he talks about the plantation he was on, that his masters formed the enslaved people who actually worked during the holidays to improve their lot by making corn brooms, mats, horse collars, and baskets, while others hunted for game to eat. Instead, most of the enslaved were encouraged to get drunk. The masters even placed bets on who could drink the most, trying to get them sickened of freedom, so that they would be even relieved to go back to the routine of being enslaved. So it was a kind of psychological game, psyops, psychological warfare that was being used against them. So he saw something a little bit different from what's being reported in these two narratives too.
And the fact that you said that Solomon Northrup had a white ghostwriter makes me question what's said in there too. How much of that is Solomon's perspective, and how much of it is distorted by the ghostwriter?
And how to sell a book.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all, it's all sad and true. There's some people just don't want to read that,
Well, there was a sentence that really bothered me when I read it, describing the feast. The ivory teeth, contrasting with their black complexions, exhibit two long white streaks the whole extent of the table. All around the bountiful board, a multitude of eyes roll in ecstasy. Cuffy's elbow launches his neighbor's side, impelled by an involuntary impulse of delight. Nellie shakes her finger at Sambo and laughs. She knows not why, and so does the fun and merriment flow on. That's like right out of stereotypical plantation writing about the good old days, how wonderful it is on the plantation. And I can't imagine the Northup really thought that.
Right.
So I think you have the ghostwriter editorializing this.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it was just making an exotic spectacle of people.
Yes.
It was, that was great. I was like, there's no way. I said, sure.
And it anticipates the horrifying spectacle of lynching becoming a spectator sport in the last century. Which is shocking when you first learn about that families were out there watching lynchings go on.
Sure.
I think, go ahead.
I was wondering about doing a comparative analysis between and this other text, and Jacobs, about whether, and I was wondering if some of you saw maybe a little bit more moments of where there was some resistance, even conflict in other ways, right? In Jacobs' narrative as compared to what we read from Northrup, right? Like if you compare those two, like, were there any differences that you noticed between the two?
I mean, there is the complication of any post with Harriet Jacobs, but that aside with, the fact that, we assume that it's mostly Harriet Jacobs, right? But there was a little bit of influence from any post that was positioning her writing and, possibly, I think that this is arguments about that, but I don't think at the big point, the main point is that Harriet Jacobs is
in a nursing home like her. She has to deal with some things that the men don't have. Either one of the men, either the or Asia, the other three men, including the white husband, like really got how to do it. And I think she's so I mean, absolutely, I think some of the things we were I think there's internal conflict throughout the whole mother. I think probably not supposed to be the whole situation of her like feeling shame and wanting, and all this stuff and wanting to be a good Christian and all this stuff. But then I think it's also there are definitely ways that she's constantly resisting, even as she's sort of creating a way sort of to navigate it. So, yeah.
But even the grandmother is resisting in a way in terms of she's showing these two other people. Look at anybody else. She's resisting by showing, like saying, I'm not doing anything wrong. She's actually looking someone.
This professional to your wife.
Yeah.
It's like I'm reminded of those kind of like trickster narratives that you have during slavery, right? Which honestly, a reflection of our trickster is obviously kind of like comes from the African continent. It has to be find significance during times of slavery, right? Where what gets you out of these moments is your ability to break, right? And to fool larger white power structures that you have to contend with, right? And so that is a trickster moment to me. Right?
Yeah, well, and Harriet even says, when she's talking about, she says Christmas is a day of feasting, both with white and colored people. Slaves who are lucky enough to have a few shillings are sure to spend them for good eating. And here's the kicker. And many a turkey and pig is captured without saying, by your leave, sir. Yeah, the word. Love that. So, yeah.
And the John Canoes are a form of resistance.
Yes.
Which go back to Africa and through the Caribbean to Jamaica particularly. All the disguises and the way to get money out of white people, to intimidate them.
I wanted to read one moment from that, like when it says, not a door is left unvisited where there is the last chance of getting a penny or a glass of rum. They do not think while they are out, but carry the rum home in jugs. Rules all. These Christmas donations frequently amount to $20 or $30. It is seldom that any white man or child refuses to give them a trifle. If it does, they regale his ears with the following song and write the song, poor massa, so they say, down in the hill, so they say, got no money, so they say, no 1 shilling, so they say, God Almighty bless you, so they say. I mean, it's a coded song, right? Making fun of the person who, yeah.
The partying comes from within the community there. I mean, don't get me wrong, I adore and admire eternally Florida Catalyst, but he was like so serious all the time. He's like, it's either this way or that way, I mean, it's like I think even with the thing, it's like, if you're gonna like get drunk, the whole thing about getting drunk and partying, if that's gonna be part of the whole, the master's plan, as opposed to, and she's like, well, we gotta do it on our own.
And it's good to think like, is survival enough and we're acting surviving? Or is it also about surviving and subversion, right? You survive, but you also act. Like I'm thinking about capoeira in Brazil, right? Oh, we're just dancing, but in reality, like this is a martial arts, like fighting technique that we are practicing. Or these people who sounds like a beautiful song, we're just singing, but in reality, there's a critique, right? They're actually criticizing the white, so there is beyond survival, right? It's subversion. Right? It ejects itself in some of these moments we just read.
And even that one song, all I want is a plantation.
Yes.
Yeah. Plantation. That's all I want.
There's actually a West African tradition with the griots. So the griots in West Africa, these are storytellers, really keepers of oral history. They sing the history of a population. They also entertain us. And some itinerant griots would go from place to place and would go in a marketplace and start singing a song in front of somebody. And if you gave them money, they would sing your praises. But if you refused, give them anything, then they would do their version of a diss song, right? You know, they would really sing horrible things about you and roast you, and they would be so funny in front of every bystander. So when I agree you can, you just make sure that you give him his due and you know. And so this almost reminded me of that tradition too, yeah.
Let's take a look at question number 3. Mitch, you want to do that one?
Yes.
He's on 11.
Yes. Why do you think the moment of reprieve Levi describes the last Christmas of the war gives him hope?
Remind me what he meant by moment of reprieve.
What happens in the story?
Well, I mean, was it when he gets the Christmas box? Okay. I just didn't remember what he called.
There are actually a number of things that, yeah.
Right. Right, in this context, like the moment where this German woman, right, relates to him in a very human way, right? You know, yes, with a bicycle, yeah. And then the gift as well, yeah.
Where did they go?
These were all extraordinary acts. I don't know exactly where in the narrative, but he actually uses the word miracle to describe what's happening. And so if something really is miracle, it's supposed to be happening, it does, then you can't help but think, oh, this miracle happened. What else could it? That was the only thing I got.
I think too, after when his coat was stolen, he says, well, somebody else gets to eat. And so he took it as kind of like it was meant to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, and even the business with the woman and the bicycle, you know, he says, I don't want to say anything nice about the Germans, but that certainly did break a stereotype or something.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
and so the fact that he, you know, while that was all going on, I was almost expecting, you know, him to get caught. I was expecting something bad to happen from it because he was so cautious about it. No, I'm not gonna go ask, you ask. I can't go get the bicycle, you go get it. All of these things. And I was, you know, expecting bad. I mean, it was pleasantly surprised when there wasn't any, you know, but, and then him saying, you know, this really does break a stereotype. Yeah. Was an interesting comment.
She breaks through the ideology, like in before that, he's having this gruesome scene with the Hitler Youth, right? Of these children who are, you know, indoctrinated in Nazi ideology to go in the battlefield, right? And act as cannon fodder. And and he's seeing, right, this ideology, and at that moment, but with this German woman, he realizes, oh, there's some people to home, right, that like they haven't bought into that yet, right? She's, being treated like human being by this other person. Yeah.
Or also not being complacent,
Mhm.
like even when you learn about something, but then you automatically know like, well, I don't believe that, but I don't want to get in trouble, so you sit by it. Where she's actively going against it, it's like, you're not supposed to talk to me, you're not supposed to treat me as a human being, I am subhuman, I should not exist, I'm here for the dirt. And you're like, listen, it's not high school, oh yeah, I'll write you this note to go get the pump and da. So, yeah. Yeah, like actively fight or like acting against what you have been told and what you've been taught.
And even giving him, paying him with the food, you know,
And then even saying like Christmas is almost here, like.
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
It would look very different for everything, obviously, and she would know that, but. Just giving a tidbit of hope and something to look forward to without even realizing what that probably meant to them.
Right.
And this is small talk.
Yeah.
Right, no, it's a person. It's this. Words do not just.
Yeah.
It's like decency is represented.
Yeah. Right.
Is there more to be read by that statement? Christmas is coming.
It's but it's.
Yeah. But also because at this point, there's like moments, right? They know that they are losing, right? That they're telling their planes have and their advances, right? They're hearing news that the Allies are advancing. The Germans seem to be losing this war, perhaps by Christmas, right? Is like, what does she mean? Like Christmas is coming soon, right? There are those layers. There's also on the one hand, like I want to say something nice. And on the, is that also a hidden message? Like, oh, this is going to end soon. Like how? We don't know. Yeah.
Around the ground, shoot, almost like a ground agent. Passing along.
Yeah. Like she thought that she was giving him some clue, but he didn't get the clue because it didn't mean anything to him. Yeah.
Well, I think it did. Yeah. I mean, he's Jewish, but he said he said it made it seem like an odd thing to say to a Jew, but he understood she was trying to give him hope and say this war is going to be over soon. We'll all be finished with this.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
What's as simple as saying she's excited about Christmas, she wanted to share that with him and didn't look at him as a Jew.
Ooh, wow.
You know what I mean? It's like you too. When it's another person. It's understood. Yeah, I saw it was like really lighthearted. I like the code though better.
He is certainly dressed like a Jewish prisoner.
You look at someone's eyes and you don't see
Yeah,
the prisoner, you don't see.
you see the face. Yeah.
It's the-
Well, let's go to the next question. Do you see a connection, and we've touched on some of this already. Do you see a connection between hope and action in any of the readings we've been talking about? Does hope lead to meaningful action? And maybe are any of the actions we've described really meaningful?
Part of it is that in order to continue to have hope, you have to be doing something. You have to keep yourself busy with something. If you just wallow in bed all day or so despondent that you can't do anything, then that just breeds more and more despondency. Even Harriet Jacobs, who's stuck in this little tiny crawl space, is doing something because she's always sewing and working, doing things with her hands, to help other people, in this case, making clothes for her kids, but she's always doing something, even in that confined space. So if you don't do something, then you just fall into that despondency. And maybe that's why, one of the reasons why, we celebrate celebrate's not the right word, but, commemorate the writings of Anne Frank is because she's stuck in this hiding back space, but she's doing something as well. And that gives her a lot of kind of hope for the future.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing something, there's not a lot of reason to have hope, or it doesn't help you to have any kind of hope.
Even when the range of your action is very constricted,
Right.
you can still do something within that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, even them talking about, finding places to hide the food and the things that they had to do, he talks about putting the cookies in his hat. And how he had to be careful when he took his hat off not to crush them, even though they weren't any good. They looked like good cookies, but he was going through these. They were pretty, they just didn't taste good, So.
So in the chat, Sadie says, listening to these stories, I feel like to have hope, you have to take back some of your dignity from your oppressors.
Yes. Yes. So finding allyship in unexpected places, right? And being prepared to find it, right? Like being cautious and careful, of course, but also, he makes that calculation like in the story and he thinks, well, I'm hungry, so like let me, but also there's a risk he's taking by talking to her and responding to her request, but he's taking that risk, right? And part of it is right, even though she's German, realizing that, yeah, maybe there's not all of them are the same, right? So there's some of them who maybe can be counted on as allies, and I mean that kind of community building gets to be extremely important, right? So during the hopeless times.
Can I cheat and change that word from hope in action, since Christina changed it to hope in writing, which I thought was pretty cool, but can I also change it to hope and empowerment in these writings? Because I mean, this is one of the things that I think of with Harriet Jacobs most of all, even the fact that she got angry and embarrassed at what Harriet Beecher Stowe did to her. And she goes back in the book, even in the book when she finally writes it, Amy post how in 1860 gets it published in 1861, that she's actually she tells the story. I mean, it's important that she ends with that story about she calls her Mrs. Bruce, but it's really recorded really that, and that she is with that story and an argument between them, where even though Mrs. Bruce is like, didn't you want me to do this? And she's like, no, I want to be able to do it myself. You don't understand. Like, I love you and I'm thankful to you, but you don't know what you took from me. And like, so by basically telling, maybe confronting Mrs. Bruce, she's able to sort of explain. So that's kind of a very action, like as a that sort of that actually reasserts and dignity when she's able to explain in the story that she sends out to the world that there is like, yes, it's what did that person in the chat say? Something about taking
dignity from your oppressors.
Taking dignity back from your oppressors. And even Mrs. Bruce, he had unintentionally act as something along, like sort of in a corner of the oppressive world, and she's like, no, I got to take that back. And I think that's just about.
sum up something that Christina said, that with a quote from Henry Louis Gates that I heard him say on television recently, testifying is a way of defying. Testifying is a way of defying. Yeah, you could cite Anne Frank as a good example of that, and all of these writers that we've been talking about. And also the idea, Viktor Frankl would be another relevant person, Auschwitz or a Holocaust survivor, man's search for meaning, finding something outside yourself to focus on as a way of surviving. Well, Mitch, we got one more question. Why don't you do that? And this is a wide open one for everybody. Try to pull together what we've been talking about and what it means to you.
So what do these readings say to you about hope in terrible times?
Which we know nothing about.
Community is everything.
Mhm.
You know, I think so many people struggle. I mean, from thinking back to, during lockdown in 2020, people really struggle to go out and physically see other people, and so inspiring to see the creative ways that people were coming up with in order to connect with other people, whether that be virtually or even just saying hello to someone through a window. Trying to hope alone is sometimes really difficult. But just having someone sitting next to you reminding you, just holding your hand, and that can mean everything.
Amy, go ahead.
I've got this. So I don't know that I have an answer, more kind of questions to talk into it. But I was thinking of Viktor Frankl before the professor mentioned him, because Viktor Frankl and it makes me think of like Nelson Mandela and the whole idea that like your choices are still yours, no matter what anyone else is imposing upon you or oppressing you with. How you respond is what you have control over, and you can, I think someone else said it earlier, you can kind of retain your dignity in the face of that oppression, which does feel kind of hopeful. And, I also think of like my favorite fictional example. I mean, Star Wars is called A New Hope. Like when they, you kind of have to, I don't know, cling to, there's got to be something better. It can't just be status quo. That's untenable. So again, I mean, I think the examples that have been set are, maintaining your own dignity, maintaining your own responses, maintaining your own integrity, and that's hopeful to me.
It's mention of power. Yeah, I love science fiction, right? I'm a Trekkie, but I love Star Wars too. But with science fiction, we think of utopia, right? Sometimes dystopia too, right? But there is in terms of hope, there is it's important to have an image of a utopia, of I think something that uh, of where how things might look, right? And respect the fact that the material realities of daily life say otherwise, but you have this notion that this this is, that things could be different, right? And you forcefully hold on to that, because I think that without that, when we accept that, this is how things are and this is how they'll always be, but there's a role for utopia, for dreaming about the impossible, right? That's not yet been made possible. As kind of like a guide, right? In small ways, you do this action here, you do this, and you don't know if it will amount to much, but there is that guide, right? That's my dream, that maybe something better might come forth. Yeah.
So I'm gonna add with the Christianity. So since it was in their, their family's religion, like they were brought up in the church because they were proselytized too. And so that hope of like the afterlife and everything is, they're gonna be reunited with all the people that they lost. because it's Christmas time. So, yeah, so I'm sorry, got you there.
Yeah.
It's like now, but it's like, oh, it's Christmas. Now, that's the religion of that time. So like, if they're, you know, their traditional religions or West African religion, you know, it was something that was, they were converted to
Yeah.
believe and there's hope, and there's a better world.
Yeah.
And so.
When you think about brands, you think about like Christian eschatology, right? With end times, right? No, but it like from the perspective of liberation theology, there's also a way in which it's about not just heaven, right, and reunification in the afterlife, but the transformation of the here, right? In important, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I thought of that when I was reading these, that I found it interesting that neither one of the freedom narratives say anything about Christ, you know, about the reason for Christmas. They just talk about the celebration, you know, not why you're celebrating, just, so it was, that's interesting, you know, idea.
Just people have brought up about Viktor Frankl, though, there's this scene in Viktor Frankl when he talks about how after a certain amount of time, some of his fellows are just really tanking. And he says it's always the people who don't believe in the future, that they don't have a story to hang on to. They don't, it's about storytelling. He said it's about community, but it's also about the ability to sort of grasp the narrative and hold on to it, I think, because it's like some of these guys are just like, no, we can't, there's nothing to live for anymore. And some of them are like, well, maybe my life will still be alive when I get out of here, or whatever. And it's the story itself, even if it's imaginary, the same stuff.
Well, community is still short.
Yeah. Right. See what you're saying, yeah. Makes the stories we tell ourselves shapes how we see our community, and then our community, you know, inevitably shapes how we see the world. And that it's kind of going back to like external versus internal. I mean, it's very symbiotic, you know. Our experiences in our past, you know, it very much like it shapes how we see things in the present, but also externally, you can't ignore that. You know, it's yeah, have nothing else. It's all it's really great. Yes. For sure, internally. Yeah.
For somebody I know who has had two really serious physical issues. One was open heart surgery that was emergency. We had no idea that he had a problem, and he ended up having a quintuple bypass. And then less than a year later was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I said, so how do you do this? And he said, and he also had, there's a lot of past problems with his wife that is really horrible. And I said, what makes you do this? What makes you get through this? And he said, I always look forward. I can't look back. I have to look forward. And that's what he tries to do in trying to help other people, teach them how to look forward. And not even look at now, look at tomorrow, look at, you know, what's coming, envision what's next, which I think is some of what comes out in the narratives in particular. It's the only way they could have survived. I dropped myself into one of those stories and I oh my God, what is, you know?
Yeah. That reminded me of like kind of a more like personal story. Like I've always been very close to my maternal grandmother. And right around the time that I was born, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she has reminded me throughout my entire life that she like basically credits me to her being a you know, I was just a little baby, you know,
not even born yet, not even realizing. But she was very much looking forward to, those moments with me and the stories she would tell herself about, the future that we would have in the relationship that we could have, and just watching me grow up. And she's amazing. She's had cancer like 4 times. She's had a heart attack, and she's like still the most energetic. Just like runs like an engine person I know. Her energy at me, it's quite something. That's exactly like her mindset. She's just like, I just go. I just keep pushing. Yeah, yeah, tough as nails.
Yes.
It's so small.
Yeah. Sadie in the chat also says, as someone who is staying home due to the COVID pandemic still, and she's a woman who's Jewish, she finds stories of the genres we've been discussing as very influential, and these stories bring me hope and perspective. It brings me hope in my life, and the hope these events are not repeated. And it's just a weird connection because you were just talking about your maternal grandmother. My maternal, well, yeah, your grandmother.
Yeah.
And my grandmother's name was Sadie. Yeah.
Comment from Rebecca Solnit, one of my favorite writers that I read frequently. She says, the tricky thing about hope is not to confuse it with optimism. Optimism is confidence that you know the future and it requires nothing of you. It's a mirror of pessimism, which likewise assumes it knows the future. Only pessimism's future is dismal and not up to us either. Hope is a sense of possibility within the uncertainty of a future that does not yet exist, but that we are making by our actions. And yeah, those we loathe and oppose are making by theirs. The future needs us. It needs us in the present to choose through powerful action the best version rather than allowing the worst to overtake us. I think that's pretty neat. And
like Timothy Snyder says, don't obey in advance.
Yes.
that's an excellent point.
And that's the power and importance of these conversations.
And to think, an example of this would be if you had asked Harriet Jacobs or Frederick Douglass or Solomon Northrup back when they wrote their narratives, they would have been happy to know that slavery was gone. But if you had said, your books will be being discussed in 2024, they would have probably thought, I'll read these books in 2024, and here we are being inspired by them. Well, that's a good example, I think, of how an act of resistance has effects beyond what the writer could have imagined.
Absolutely right. Well, this has been a lovely discussion. It is 8:20, so we're gonna have to wrap up. But thank you all for joining us tonight, both online and here at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. I will remind you that we are currently in our winter hours, which means that we are open on Tuesdays and from 10 to 4 for public tours. And while we don't have any, this is our final public discussion group of the year. We will be restarting in February with poetry by Robert Hayden. And then we also have lots of different other programs scheduled for next year as well. So check our website, make sure you're on the mailing list so that you can get updates. Any last words?
Thank you all for a wonderful discussion.
Christmas.
It gives me